So the next thing I'm going to do is actually make it look a little bit better. So in addition to wrapping all the buttons in a single div, I'm going to do the same with the properties. I'm going to put all of them inside a div. So inside render property, I'm going to do render prop. No, I want a new method called render properties that does all of them. So render properties needs flick and item, and it's going to make a div just like this. Going to make a div. Create element div. I'll just call it div. I'm going to give it a class name too. So div.classlist.add. I'll call it info, where all the properties are going to go. And I'll make it the one that gets the list of properties and loops over each property. And instead of appending it to the item, I will append it to the div and return the div. So I guess I don't actually need item in here, do I? We're not using that. Seems like all we need to do. So now I'm wrapping it in a div. So where are we? Back in render item. Let's do that. Add all the properties. I'll save it to a variable called properties, and that'll be this.render properties. Just pass it the flick. And append that to render item properties. So it's just a single div now, right? So render item is getting simpler and simpler. Its job is to create an LI with a class on it. It adds all the properties, which another function does the details. It adds all the action buttons, and again, another function does all the details. Yeah.
Is that item or item?
Where? Sorry, item. Thank you. Thank you. Yep. Let's try again. Thor, Chris H. Still adds them. Now if I look at the HTML, I've got this div here and this div here. So the nice thing about that is then I can very easily use Flexbox to make them, to make all this on the far left and the buttons on the far right. So they're both inside this flick LI. So if I just target that flick LI, I don't think I have any CSS for that yet. I'll just tell it I want to use Flexbox. And you remember I said that Flexbox, one of the main things you do with that is you tell it what to do with the leftover space after it's put everything that's in there. So what I can say here is justify content space between. And all the extra space will just go in between those two things. There you go. Now this is all the way to the right. This is all the way to the left. If I want to make sure, see, these buttons aren't really centered relative to this. This was one of the hardest things to do in HTML before Flexbox, or with CSS, is to get things vertically aligned like this. Pain in the neck. With Flexbox, align items, center, and it just does it. Look at it right now. See, the buttons aren't centered, are they? Let's refresh. Let's do it again. Look at that. Just like that. You have no idea how hard this used to be. Kids today, they have no appreciation. I used to walk uphill both ways to my CSS. So I added a bunch more styles too, because it's me. So let's just dump all this in here. I'll put it in Slack. I made this green because my delete button is going to be red. Jurassic World. Fallen Kingdom. Pratt. There we go. Oh, zoomy zoomy. Fancy. So I'll point out a few mildly interesting things here. Stuff like hover. It's called a pseudo class, preceded by a colon instead of a dot. So basically, depending on the state of the element, JavaScript kind of automatically adds new classes to it. Like when you hover over it, it adds this hover class, and it takes it off as soon as you're no longer hovering over it. But it's not a real class, it's a pseudo class. So colon instead of dot. This just means this rule will only apply when I'm actually hovering over the thing. Also worth pointing out, there's a class on the same one. You can have multiple classes on the same thing, like .flick.fave here. Now, if I had a space there, that would mean something with a class of fave that is inside something with a class of flick. But like this, it means those classes are on the same thing. So I'm looking for an element that has the class of flick and the class of fave, like this one. Let's add some more. Let's add Winter Soldier with Evans. Let's add Vroom Vroom Ferrari with Hemsworth. Ooh, stripiness. Oh, remember the stripiness from earlier? Was that whose stripiness was that? Oh yeah. How'd you do the stripiness? Yeah, nth of type. Yeah, so that's another pseudo class like hover. Right here. So a pseudo class called nth of type. You could say even or odd in there, or you could actually put like number 7 only. And this does just what it sounds like. It gives a different background color to just the odd ones in the list. So nth of type meaning, like these are all LIs. So LI siblings in the same container. This will apply to that. Super handy for stuff like striping rows in a table or something. Super handy. Again, if you're curious about that, look it up in CSS tricks. But it's very cool, and that's how I got this effect. And that's why it still works if we delete it. Like, Vroom Vroom Ferrari is gray right now, but if I delete Winter Soldier, it's white. Because now it's the second one, not the third one. It's no longer odd. Favorite? Oh yeah, totally works. The little zoomy effect here. That's a transform. So when you hover over this button, so any button inside actions that I'm hovering over, I say transform scale 1.1. So scale 1.0 would be keep it the same size. 1.1, make it 10% bigger. That's all I'm doing. And notice it happens kind of smoothly. Zoop, zoop, zoop. It doesn't just happen all at once. That's because of transition up here. So transition, you can say that certain properties should, if they ever change, they should change gradually. So I'm saying that background color should change over 1/4 of a second. I'm saying that a transform, which is what this is, should also happen over 1/10 of a second. So it shouldn't take long, but it's a little less jarring than if it happens all at once. Ease out. So this is optional, but you can tell it not to do it linearly. So like over the course of this 1/4 of a second, it's not just changing it to that background color evenly over that course of a second. Ease out means let's all face the same direction. It kind of starts out going fast, changing the color, and then it sort of eases out of the animation. So that's how I do all the things where I go zoop, zoop. Whenever I say zoop, I'm doing some kind of transition.
How do you use to highlight the
The color? See, background color, remove. It's this color. With the hover pseudo class, it's a slightly different color. So just a different color on the hover state. Yep. And this one I actually add a darker shadow too. So I changed it to green because these are red. So again, feel free to look through these, look up any properties you're interested in. And we mentioned the other day, there's a great Flexbox guide on CSS tricks. That link was already shared on the website. She just threw it in Slack again too. And there's also, if you're really interested in this stuff, CSS layout's really interesting these days. There's also a really good tutorial at flexbox.io called What the Flexbox. That is a free video series from Wes Boss, the same person who did JavaScript 30, which was in one of your recommendations before class. So it's 20-some videos just on how Flexbox works. It's really cool. Check it out if you're interested in that kind of thing. Groovy? All right, so what we really did here was style the individual flicks. Questions? All right, let's take a quick break. 10 minutes.